ended up what drew me out of law enforcement to the tech industry as a recruiter. And shortly after that, I started my company, which is Recruiting Heroes. You can see the sign behind me. And what Recruiting Heroes does is we are a recruiting or an employment agency, and we help law enforcement officers and military veterans with their career transition to the private sector. So when your years of service are done and you're looking to find your next career, your next passion in life, that's where we come in to help. And one of the big things we do is help with resumes. That's a huge part of it. And that's why I wanted to hold this class today. A lot of law enforcement officers, especially, struggle with resume writing. It's just not something that's a big part of what we need in law enforcement. You know, you may have submitted a resume when you first applied, but honestly, that didn't really matter as long as your background was clean and you had a good head on your shoulders. They may have asked it for promotional processes, but even that wasn't really critical. So when it comes time to writing a resume in the private sector, that's where a lot of people struggle because they've either never written one or they haven't written one in many years and don't fully understand what goes into writing a resume. But yeah, let's go dive on right on in. If you have a second though, do like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me reach more people. I'd really appreciate it. Again, we're trying to help law enforcement officers, military veterans, other first responders, and really any candidate who's looking to make a career change do so. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Mm. 1 second. All right. Technical problems. My apologies. Hopefully you all can see it. If you can't see it, just let me know in the comment section. That way I can be aware if there's any technical issues on your end. But it looks like it should be showing. This is the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to be going off of today. All right, let's dive right on in. All right, as I mentioned before, my name is Colin Whittington, and looks good. All right, thanks, Charles. I appreciate it. I'm going to keep it on the smaller screen. That way I can see comments as well, because those go away when I make it a larger screen. All right, so like I said before, my name is Colin Whittington, served in the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, Deputy of the Year, you name it. And then I got into recruiting and background investigations before going into the tech industry and in the recruiting industry from there. I'm also the best-selling author of my first book, which is called Beyond the Thin Blue Line. That book is all about transitioning to the private sector, whether it be identifying industries that align with your interests, resume writing, LinkedIn optimization, interview techniques, salary negotiations, you name it. And that book's available on my website and also on Amazon, but I'll talk about that at the very end. All right, Eric, you're here from Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. There you go. I love it. Another deputy sheriff here. Thank you so much for being here. If anyone else wants to share the agency they work for, I'd love to hear what part of the country you're tuning in from. It always feels nice that we can connect virtually when in person is more difficult. So I appreciate you all being here. All right. So the first thing I always start when I talk about resume writing, and really just starting the topic of transition to the private sector, especially for law enforcement officers, is trying to figure out what you can articulate and what you can highlight as far as the skills that you have gained. We in law enforcement and the military have done so many cool and wonderful things, but it's articulating those skill sets and that experience to civilian employers who have never had a career in law enforcement or a career in the military. That's where a lot of people can struggle at times because they don't know what exactly they should highlight and how they should articulate the skill set that they can bring. Charles here from Fort Walton Beach PD, Northwest Florida. That's awesome. I actually recruited for a company in that area not too long ago. I'm sure you're enjoying the much warmer weather than we are here in Virginia. We're supposed to get a snowstorm here tomorrow. But anyway, Illinois State Police. Thanks, Neil, for being here. I appreciate you as well. The question I always get from law enforcement officers, or the comment I hear so often from our heroes, as we call them, when they're trying to transition to the private sector, there's a couple of things. One is that they don't think they're a fit for anything in the private sector. And, that's really sad to hear, and that's completely wrong. Like I said before, you all bring such a wide range of talents and skills that you can bring to the private sector. And so many companies out there are actually really looking for people with your background. Um, the other thing I hear is that people, especially from the law enforcement background, feel they're stuck or confined to stay in security or in investigations. Um, and those industries are this shouldn't be a knock on those industries, right? Those industries are phenomenal. You can do really well in those industries if that's what you're interested in. There's a lot of cops that do make that transition to that industry, and they do phenomenally well. In my book, I talk about a gentleman named Brian Tuskin. Brian also runs Cop to Corporate, which is a nonprofit that helps law enforcement officers transition to the private sector. He was a police officer in Hawaii and Seattle, never became any kind of rank. He was a detective for a while. He ended up getting picked up by Microsoft because of the phenomenal work he did as a detective in one of their cases. He stayed there for 20 years, and he worked his way all the way up to being the chief security officer for all of Microsoft. So he was literally the highest ranking security officer for the third largest company in the world. And is just a police officer and a detective. Never became a major, sheriff, whatever else. He was, pretty much a front lines kind of guy. So there are a lot of opportunities in the security industry, but I also don't want anyone to think that they are confined to just one industry because you have more skills and more experience than you might think. Dan, thank you for joining as well. NYPD, that's awesome. I'm sure you all must be plenty busy up there and have even colder weather than we are. So thanks for being here, Dan. So some of the things that law enforcement officers can highlight when they talk about themselves in the private sector in the job search process. Of course, leadership, that's a huge one, even if you weren't necessarily a supervisor, right? Let's say you were an FTO, a field training officer, and you trained and mentored younger rookie officers. That's a leadership skill. We don't really use the term project management in law enforcement or the military as much, but if you're working with a rookie to try to get him or her to a certain point, which is probably getting him or her to be solo officer, you were a project manager. So a lot of the skill sets they're looking for project managers, you actually have just by taking on that leadership role. Team management, similar. Communication is a big one. This younger generation right now, especially I'm a millennial, but the millennials and the Gen Zers are even worse. They can't talk worth a crap. They're so used to living on their phones, living behind their devices, that having a straight up conversation like we are now, it's impossible for them. They really struggle with that. So having someone who has been in really tricky situations, really crisis situations, really, and be able to communicate through them is an amazing skill that not many people in the private sector can claim that they have. And that's something that's going to set you apart. Of course, you know about law enforcement procedures, interviewing, interrogation, surveillance, report writing, courtroom testimony. All those things are things that you gained over, 20, 30 years in law enforcement. Training and mentoring, like I mentioned before, a really big one. Problem solving. There's, again, not a lot of people in the private sector can think as quickly on their feet as a cop can or as a military veteran. Oftentimes we're thrown into some serious cases and we're the only ones there, have to figure out a situation that could be life or death. And being able to think calmly and make a decision in those quick and serious situations is pretty unique to what we can do as law enforcement officers and veterans as well. And then you also want to highlight everything else that you've done. Talk about your analytical skills. You may not be analyzing like data as far as a company goes, but you're probably analyzing crime data and investigating why crimes are happening in certain regions in your county, or investigating, if you pulled cell phone data from a suspect, you're analyzing that data. So there's so much you can bring into the table in all of those fields. And this is just a small list of things that you can highlight. I should have mentioned in the beginning, if you do have a question at any point, just put in the comments. You won't bother me at all. I'd love to hear your questions throughout, and just to see what the questions are. And I should mention again, I don't think I mentioned it yet, but I should mention it at the end of this. I'm also going to give away one free of my resume writing services, which is usually $2.99. You're going to get it for free just for being here. And the rest of you all who aren't lucky enough to win it, you still get 50% off any of our services if you need it. All right. So translating skills and experience. That's where I see a lot of people in law enforcement and the military truly struggle when it comes to articulating what they've done and highlighting it for civilians to understand. Charles, thank you for your 19 years. That's pretty awesome. I only managed 8 years, and that felt like a lot. So someone making 2 decades is pretty impressive. So again, big way what I see people struggling with is how they articulate what they bring to the table. And I think law enforcement especially struggles with it because we're so used to being around other cops and we all talk a certain way. We understand the jargon and the lingo that we say to each other, that when we try to express what we've done to a civilian with no prior law enforcement background, we don't fully appreciate just how little they know about what it takes to be in law enforcement and what exactly is behind it. I use this example, the first one, quite often. If you, let's say you were in charge of your agency's SWAT team, right? A civilian employer is going to look at that and say, "Oh, cool. He's like the guys on TV or in the movies who kick down doors and just tackle bad guys to the ground," right? That's what they're going to think of when you say that you led a SWAT team. But they're not going to think about the fact that you managed 10 officers. Perhaps you oversaw a budget of $2 million, depending on your agency, and you were responsible for utilizing and maintaining that equipment, and then creating operations plans to make sure that high pressure situations were resolved peacefully. So there's so much more that goes into that specific role than just saying, I led a SWAT team. What you want to do is pretend the person you're talking to has no prior knowledge about what you've done, because chances are they don't. Same thing with communication. I have a lot of officers tell me that they interrogated suspects, and that's what they put on their resume. Okay, that's not really going to be enough to pique a recruiter's interest and see for him to understand just how vital your communication skills are. So instead of saying that you interrogated suspects, try saying that you conducted detailed interviews, interrogations, and negotiations to gather information, resolve disputes, and solve crimes, enhancing team collaboration and stakeholder satisfaction. Private sectors want to have people that can speak, that can resolve disputes, and that can work together as a team. Because again, so many of the current younger generation are struggling in that environment. So being able to do that is highlight that as an important part of your process. And then problem solving, of course, as well. You can say that you conducted investigations, but no one's going to understand that the hours and hours you dedicated towards solving a simple larceny, or God forbid, a homicide. You may have spent, thousands of hours investigating a case. And because of your hard work, you saw a 30% reduction in crime rates. Things like that are what you want to really highlight. Recently retired Montana Highway Patrol Trooper. Thank you for being here. That's awesome. When did you retire? If you don't mind me asking. I'll keep going while you might answer. Okay. So the resume writing, let's dive right on into this right away. Okay. So I'm going to start July 2nd. That's pretty amazing. Well, thank you so much. And I'm glad that you're here. I think resume writing can benefit anybody, whether you're starting your career or you're at the tail end of it. I think resume writing is a perfect skill for anybody, regardless of their career position at this time. Okay. So why are resumes important? Again, I mentioned they're not really a huge thing in the military or in law enforcement, but in the private sector, they are absolutely everything. Resumes are usually the first thing a company is going to see or learn about you when you first apply for a role. Usually, I have the 7.4 second things hidden so you all can guess, but since this is I'm trying to be courteous of your time, we're going to go a little right straight into it. But they did a study on looking at what is the average amount of time a recruiter spends looking at a singular resume. And they came back with saying that it's only 7.4 seconds. So you have 7.4 seconds to show a recruiter why you are a good fit for their role and their company, and why they should invest more time in you as a candidate. Because if you don't do that in the first 7.4 seconds, chances are you're going to get disqualified immediately without having the chance to interview. And that's typically the thing I see the most with law enforcement officers and veterans transitioning, is that they are submitting, dozens or hundreds of applications and resumes and not getting invited to interviews. And typically, if you're not getting invited to any interviews at all, it's probably that there's a problem with your resume. And the fact that the layout of it, what you have in there, might not be looking exactly what the recruiters are looking for. So on your resume, you can really showcase your skills and experience. This is not a time to be modest. A lot of officers, we're cocky with each other, but when it comes time to actually trying to get a job, we kind of become more modest and don't actually say what all the amazing things that we've done. And that's going to be a disservice for you. You want to really highlight, this is what I've done, this is what I've accomplished, and you should be proud of that. Um, Is that the number including the ATS time or after? So that is what they say. And if a recruiter actually looks at your resume, that's how much time is. We'll get more into applicant tracking systems here shortly, but there are going to be plenty of resumes that never get looked at by human eyes. And we'll really dive into that here shortly and talk about why it's so important to tailor your resume for each job. That way you can get through the ATS compatibility part. That's a phenomenal question. Professionalism, using your resume to show up how professional you are. I get resumes all the time that look like an absolute mess. There's misspellings, grammar mistakes, formats all crazy, and that just doesn't scream professionalism. And again, if you have one chance to make a first impression, you want it to be a good one. You can also tailor your resume to each job, like I just mentioned, and we'll dive into that more here once we get into it. But a lot of candidates, especially those I help coming out of a line of service, they think that they'll create a resume, and then they've made that one resume, and that's it. They're done with it forever, and they can submit it to every job they apply to. Doesn't matter if they're applying to jobs in the same industry or jobs in 20 different industries. They're going to submit their same resume to each of them. And that's really doing you a disservice. And honestly, in this current age, if you're doing that, the chances of you getting an interview are slim to none. Every single job has their own unique requirements, and the recruiters are looking for certain things. And that is where applicant tracking systems come in. So if you haven't heard of ATS or applicant tracking systems, I'll talk about them in greater length later, but they're software that almost every single major company and even minor company has. My company, it's me and 3 people, right? We're tiny and we have an applicant tracking system. And what we do is you actually go in there. It's a way of recruiters staying organized with all the jobs they have, because typically recruiters are working not just that one job, they're working 20 jobs plus sometimes. So they'll write up the job description in the applicant tracking system. They'll hit submit, and then that job description will be automatically posted on all the job boards that ATS has a partnership with. For ours, it's about 28 or 30 job boards. So it goes to Indeed, it goes to Dice, it goes to Monster, it goes to LinkedIn, and all the other ones. When you as a candidate apply, though no matter where you apply from, whether it's on our website or Indeed, Dice, anywhere else, those resumes all get funneled into our applicant tracking system. The system will then scan your resume and scan the job description, and it will tell you or tell the recruiter or me how close of a match you are to the job description. And for ours, it actually gives a percentage. It said, hey, Colin, this person is a 72% match, or this person is a 4% match. Oh, FBI, thank you for being here, Tim. I really appreciate it. My brother just joined about 2 years ago. So I really appreciate what you all do. And thanks for being here. But yeah, so our applicant tracking system will actually tell us a percentage score about how close of a match you are to the job description I'm applying for. And for our company, I've made the policy that my recruiters will look at every resume we receive. But this is far from the norm. Recruiters typically only get paid or get paid their commission when they make a placement or when a candidate gets hired. So they are rewarded for being fast. And if they're working 20 roles at a given time and each role gets 100 resumes, which nowadays is actually kind of at the low end, but let's say 100 resumes and they have 20 roles, they're getting hundreds or thousands of resumes every single day. And to actually read through each of them is going to be an amazing, enormous time, take an enormous amount of time, and it'll end up slowing them down. So what a lot of recruiters are doing is they're trusting their applicant tracking system. And if the ATS says, hey, Colin, these are the top 10, those recruiters will look at those top 10 and from those top 10 decide who they want to interview. So if you're number 11 or God forbid number 90, there's a chance your resume will never get looked at by human eyes. And oftentimes it's not the best candidate who gets interviewed or hired. It's the person with the best resume. Because if you're not tailoring your resume towards the job that you're applying for, you're not going to score highly on that and you won't be able to prove your skill set. So we'll dive more into that shortly as well. It's also a great marketing tool. Again, you can really highlight who you are and what you've done. And it's just a phenomenal way to highlight your entire career and what you've accomplished. And then I like to use my resume and the candidate resumes to actually prepare for interviews. Chances are when you go for an interview with one of these companies, you're going to be sitting across from a recruiter or hiring manager, and he will have one piece of paper for his notes or her notes, and on the other piece of paper will be your resume. And they'll most likely go through it and ask you questions on each job and the bullet points you have on there. So using your resume as a refresher for what you've accomplished is a good thing as well. And I like to use those before candidates go for interviews. So as I mentioned, I get bombarded with resumes every single day from the jobs we're applying for, as well as candidates needing help. And I've seen some phenomenal ones, and I've seen many terrible ones. All right, many terrible ones. And this is some that came in over the past couple of weeks. Um, so the one on the left, I've hid the names just out of the respect to them. You can see on the jobs, he has the job title listed. He has the company, the location, and the dates of employment. So those are all positive things. But he has no description of what he did or what he accomplished in each of those roles. So the chances of him hitting highly on an applicant tracking system scan are slim to none. And even if it does somehow squeak by the system, once a recruiter looks at this, they would never know what exactly he accomplished when he was a quality assurance technician. It's just so vague. If I never heard of this company before, which I honestly haven't, I wouldn't even know what they do exactly. So I don't know if he's working on trucks, if he's working on data centers. I don't know what he's doing. So this one in particular has absolutely no bullet points, no description of what he's accomplished. He does have his high school on there, which we'll talk about later, why I recommend to not put your high school diploma on your resume. But he has no other certifications, nothing else to really highlight what else he brings to the table. Then the second one on the right is even worse. This one, he doesn't even have the company's name. He doesn't have the location or the dates of employment. He simply has what I believe is a job title. I have no idea what SQL DBA is. I think it's something to do in the tech industry, but I have no clue. I have no idea if he's been there for a week or if he's been there for 30 years. So this is one this poor candidate will never get a chance to interview for a job because he's going to be competing against he or she's going to be competing against at least 50 or 100 more candidates. And if this is all the recruiter sees, they're just going to disqualify him without even giving him a chance to highlight what he's done. And then he has his bachelor's degree, but again, it doesn't say what degree, what university. It doesn't tell me really anything. This guy has a skill section, which I like, but it's only 2 skills and very limited, so not very helpful. All right, so now we're going to dive into the resume template that I use. I'm using that as an example for what exactly I recommend to have on your resume. For those of you who gave me your email in advance, I sent you this resume template this morning. If anybody else wants a copy of this resume template, I give it away for free. You can either put your comments, you can add your email to the comment section, and I'll send it to you after this training. Or if you want to email me directly, my email will be provided at the end of the training as well. But it's a template I use for my own personal resume. It's also one that I've used with my candidates, and it's worked very, very well. Okay, of course, the first thing that I think when I look at this resume, it looks clean and professional. It's laid out pretty nicely, and it's easy for me to find the critical information I'm looking for. So if I need to find the candidate's name, pretty easy to find. His contact information, same thing. If I'm looking at his skills, I can find that, and then work experience, and so on. I will say this is page 1 of 2, so there's a second page as well. But starting at the very top, your name. People always ask me what they should put there, the ones who have like nicknames and stuff. My recommendation is to go with your legal name. But if you do have a name that you go by, if you go by Dick instead of Robert, let's just say, you can put that on there as well. Just make sure whatever the name is, it's something that's professional and not something that your drinking buddies gave you back in college, right? You want to make sure that it's something that you actually go by and that you are okay with a potential future employer seeing. Then below that, I'd like to have all your contact information and general information about you and where you are. So the first one is the location. Some candidates put their entire address on there, and I recommend against that. I recommend only putting the city and state. Most likely, you're going to be applying to a number of jobs, and in each job, your resume might be passed around to 10 or more people. So, do you really want 50 or 100 plus people knowing your exact address? I wouldn't I wouldn't want that. So I recommend just putting your city and your state. That's more than enough. And if they decide to hire you, they can get all the actual address from you at a later time. Next is your phone number. Big one here for law enforcement, especially. Put your personal number on the resume, unless you're applying for an internal role with your agency. If you're applying for a private sector job or a job with the federal government, put your private number on there, not your work number. Same thing goes with email as well. This is a big one too. I see a lot of government emails on here. Again, if you're staying internally or trying to stay in the government kind of realm, it might be fine. But if you're trying to go to the private sector, put your personal email. Make sure your email is set up so you can receive emails, and make sure your email is professional. I see some pretty weird emails from guys and gals who made their email when they were in middle school, and it's just not looking very professional. So if you need to update your email, do that. I had a Hotmail account for years. It wasn't unprofessional, but it looked kind of weird still being a Hotmail. So I finally gave in and got a Gmail account probably like 6 years ago. So make sure your email is something that you can be okay with people seeing. On your address, do you recommend changing it to a target location you're maybe trying to move to? Yes. So I would put that if you're thinking about moving to a certain location, you can put that exact location on there. Or what you could do is put your current location, put parentheses, and say open to relocation. That's a good thing that I recommend as well. If you're open to moving anywhere or just moving in general, I would put it on there, especially if you're applying for a job that's not where you're currently located. So I'm here in Boyce, Virginia right now, right? Let's say I was applying for a job in Houston, Texas. I would want to put on my resume either Houston, Texas, or put on there where I currently am, which is Boyce, Virginia, but say I'm open to relocation. That way, when a recruiter sees my resume, he or she knows that I didn't miss the fact that this job's in Houston. They might get nervous saying, oh, this person has to move. Does he actually want to? And again, they're working to try to make a placement. So they may not even take the time to ask me that question. So if it is a job that's not located where you currently are, make sure you mention that you're open to relocation. James Charles is a great question. And then the final one I like to have on this row um, is your LinkedIn link. And this is a little caveat here. You should put your LinkedIn profile link on here if you are actively using LinkedIn and you think your LinkedIn profile is professional. If your LinkedIn profile hasn't been touched in 10 years or you're posting a bunch of crazy stuff, which I hope you're not, I would leave it off. But if you're actively on LinkedIn, don't have to be posting as much as I do. I know I post a lot, but if you're on there and are commenting now and then, sharing a post every now and then, I would put your LinkedIn profile on there. And the reason is another study that recently came out said that recruiters are actually spending more time looking at candidates' LinkedIn profiles than their resumes. So we said the resume is 7.4 seconds. They say that recruiters spend at least double, if not triple, that amount of time looking at profiles. And I know that for a fact, that's how it is with me. When I'm trying to find candidates for my company, for the clients that we're working with, I'll look at the resume first. If it piques my interest, I'll spend a little bit more time on the resume. And if I like what I see after a deeper dive in that, I go to their profile. And that's where I can really dig in and really see what exactly this person's about. Because you can use so much, you can put so much more on your LinkedIn profile than you can on a resume. So a lot of candidates are able to add in way more detail about their accomplishments. So that's where I go to look at that. And if you're interested in LinkedIn and want to have this similar training on LinkedIn, put in the comments as well. I'd love to host this again in a week or two and do a LinkedIn optimization course because I think it's super important and something that's very underutilized, especially those coming from a life of service. So the next thing I like to do is have 2 or 3 titles that kind of highlight who you are as a professional. So this person I put lieutenant, law enforcement specialist, and commander. You could put crisis manager, you can put risk assessment expert, you can put expert testimony witness, you can put a number of things on there. But I like to have 2 or 3 that kind of highlight what you're interested in. If you have a clearance, I would put that there. Another thing you can do is also put the career you're interested in or the job you're applying to. Again, if you're a law enforcement officer, let's say you were a lieutenant and you're now applying for a program manager role, you can put program manager on here and that shows the recruiter that you're interested in program management. And it also does the double benefit of then also hitting on the applicant tracking system because you have the exact job title from the job they're looking for in your resume. So consider using one of the 3 spots for your the job you're applying for. And again, you would tailor that for each resume. I'm a little unique in this one, I think. Pretty much every resume writer recommends having an executive summary, which is the longer paragraph below. But I also like to have a 1 sentence, very quick highlight of who you are. It really shouldn't be more than maybe 2 sentences, but I try to be 1. And that's where you just highlight who you are as a law enforcement officer or a veteran or whatever career you've come from and what you've accomplished in 1 quick sentence. Using the alternative color, I think, kind of draws people towards it as well. Again, you only have 7.4 seconds to draw their attention. So having something that really draws them in and gives them a quick snapshot of who you are is a good idea. But the executive summary or summary statement, depending on how you want to call it, is the bigger block of text right below. This should be only about 4 or 5 paragraphs. It shouldn't go on forever, but it should highlight who you are as a candidate, what you've accomplished. If you can use data or analytics in there, it's a great place to do that. Obviously, you should do that in your work experience as well, which we'll talk about shortly. But again, when someone is reading a resume, they're going to look at the top part most likely first, and that's where your timer starts. So if you can highlight some of your major accomplishments in that first summary, it's a great place to put in your achievements, major awards, and other accomplishments that you've done. If you're really struggling with it, I know some people aren't like very great writers, right? And we didn't go into law enforcement to write papers by any means. You can use AI as at least as a starting tool, right? You can put in all your experience and ask it to come up with a one paragraph executive summary for your resume. I would be cautious to just copy and paste it and throw it in there because AI just it reads a certain way, and most people can tell it was written by AI. But it's a good place to get started. You can at least get a general idea of how to phrase things, and then you can go in and tailor it towards what sounds more like you and change it. But it's a good starting spot if you're completely stuck and have no idea what to say. The next section, some people call it skills. I call it area of expertise, really interchangeable. And these should be 9 to 12 skills or areas of expertise that you feel you can bring to a company. And this area is the one I really recommend you tailor towards the job you're applying for. I think it's one where you can put in some really important keywords, and it's also one that's very easily changed. You don't have to change the whole like a whole sentence or anything. You can literally exchange one for another. So in this candidate, let's say like the first one is problem management is one of his skills. Let's say he was applying now for a recruiting job. I could easily swap that one out because that might not be as important for that job and put in recruiting or sourcing or candidate interviews or you name it. So that's where you can easily make that change to make sure that your resume is constantly being tailored to the job you're applying for. But again, I would keep it to about 8 or 12 skills. Some people put on there like 50 some, and it's crazy. Put it to the most important ones and tailor it towards the job that you're applying for. All right. So the next part of the resume is your professional experience. This is where you actually get to talk about what you've done and what you've accomplished. Here's a big thing is to start with your current or most recent job first and go backwards in reverse chronological order. I did a resume. I helped a pretty high-ranking police. I think he was a deputy chief a few weeks ago, and he actually had it the reverse way around, where he had his oldest job first, and it was like working at McDonald's or something, and then he had his deputy chief job all the way at the bottom. Don't do that. I want you to start with your current or most recent job first. The reason again is the most likely that's going to be your most impressive role, and it's going to be the role the recruiters and hiring managers are going to be most interested in. They really want to see what you've done in the last 10 years or so. Anything beyond that, it's nice to mention it, and we'll talk about that on the second page. But really, they don't care what you did in the 90s or early 2000s. They want to know what you've done in the last 10 to 15 years. And again, you have 7.4 seconds to impress them. So you better put your most important job and most recent job first. So how I do it, I like to have the agency or organization's name, the location, and the dates of employment. And those dates of employment would be for the entire duration with that organization or agency. So that would be from the time you were a rookie all the way up until whatever rank you were when you are now or when you were leaving. Then underneath it, I would put your ranks again with your most recent one first and going backwards from there. And on each rank, you would put the dates of employment or dates you were in that position. So for this gentleman, he was with the Metropolitan Airports Authority from 2013 to currently, but he was a police chief only from January 23 to present. So you will have multiple dates on there. You but separate it based on the total time with an organization as well as time in each position. I like to do that because, again, not everybody understands law enforcement. They might look at this and say, "Oh, this guy jumped jobs all the time." If you only put, your current the dates with your current role, they might look at it differently. But if you show the big chunk of time you spent with an agency for this gentleman, 12 years, that's going to look better to a recruiter than looking at someone who they think is a job hopper. Okay, the big thing I hear with resumes as well, or see with resumes, is that people use paragraph format on their work experience. That's, in my opinion, a big no-no. Use bullet points. When a recruiter looks at your resume, you don't want their first thought to be, "Oh, crap, do I have to read all that?" And that's 100% my first impression when I see a resume that has a giant block of text, executive summary aside, but a giant block of text under one of the jobs, and I have to read through it all. the first impression is really hard to overcome. And if I feel frustrated with the first impression, it's going to be hard for me to fully give the candidate a full chance. Using bullet points allows you to really point out and highlight certain key elements of what you've done and make it much easier for the recruiter to read. And that's what your job should be all about, trying to make the recruiter's life easier and make him impressed with your background. And every single bullet point in your resume, and really everything you write in your resume, should have one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to show why you are a good fit for that role and why they should be interviewing you. A good resume won't necessarily win you the job because you still have to go and interview and prove yourself in person. But a bad resume 100% will cost you a job. So I'm glad you're here today because this is a super important topic. So bullet point format, and make every single one of them count. I see too often people use a bullet point to say that they're a hard worker or a team player. That means absolutely nothing to a recruiter or hiring manager. What you want to do is try to incorporate as much data or analytics as you possibly can. So if you are a sergeant, don't just say you supervise a squad, right? Say you supervise a squad of 6 police officers and 2 civilians, and then talk about the duties that you had, and try to use more metrics throughout the whole resume. So if you managed a budget, highlight that. If you worked a certain number of cases per year, mention that. If you're a patrol officer, talk about the size of the beat or sector that you worked, approximately how many citizens were in that sector, and typically how many calls for service you handled per day. That shows how you're able to deal with a giant caseload at once and keep your head and also be able to work through a problem. So again, data. That's one of the biggest problems I see in resumes is people are just way too vague, right? They can say, I responded to emergency calls for service. Cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate your service, but so did 800,000 other cops, right? You want to show what makes you different. Every single bullet point on your resume, whether you're a police officer, a federal agent, military veteran, you want to highlight what you did and how you helped your organization and achieve whatever the mission was, um, and not just keep it vague. So that's a really big point. Highlight what you accomplished. If the resume is reading like a generic job description that could fit any police officer, you're not doing it quite right. You should be able to look at your resume and say, yeah, that's me because I did this. I made 55 DUI arrests this year. I conducted 35 interrogations. I wrote 55 search warrants. Whatever the case may be, you want to make it tailored to what you have done because that's going to impress a recruiter or hiring manager way more than saying that you responded to emergency calls for service because they can pretty much guess that by your job title. Feel free to keep asking questions. All right. So this is the second page, and people always ask me how long should a resume be? The old standard of one-page resumes have kind of gone by the wayside, which is a good thing. Now the current standard is a two-page resume is pretty much the norm, and this is for private sector jobs. I had a gentleman reach out yesterday about applying for the federal job. That's awesome as well. But federal resumes are a little bit different, and we'll probably do a federal resume workshop in the future as well. Federal resumes can probably be more to the 4 or 5 pages because they want way more detail. They want supervisors' names. They want salary numbers. And they want way more detail in the whole resume, just in general. But for the private sector, 2 pages is pretty much the standard. If you've had a really long career and really ranked, like gotten to really high positions, you might be justified to go to 3 pages. But honestly, don't go much past that. And ideally, stay to 2 pages. The longest resume I ever received, I think, was 28 pages long. And it was a guy who only had like 3 years of work experience. And he just listed everything he ever did at the 2 jobs he had worked at. And it was 28 pages long because someone had told him to do that. Don't do that. Don't make, again, if the recruiter's first thought when he looks at your resume is, oh God, that's not a good spot to get you to the interview. And that's what the resume is all about. You keep the recruiter happy and make yourself look like you can be a good fit for the role. And then you can get an interview as well. So you want to continue going down your work experience. Again, starting with your most recent job or current job first and going backwards from there. Again, if you're under one organizations, you would just add subsections to the main section. So if you were like me, Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, I would put recruiting sergeant, then I would put public information officer, and then patrol deputy, and I'd go down from there. If you worked at different organizations or different companies, you would then add a new section. You can see it right here, where would actually put the new organization's name, again, their location, and also dates of employment with that organization. And then again, subsections with the job titles you've had there. I mentioned earlier that I recommend only going into detail on your jobs you've had in the last 10 to 15 years or so. This is really important because, again, a resume should say to 2 pages. And if you are giving details in every job you've had over the last 30 years, you're either going to go blow past that 2 page requirement or limit, or each section, each job title that you have had, you can only go into very brief detail about what you accomplished. Again, recruiters only really care about what you've done or accomplished in the past 10 to 15 years. So if you have had jobs before that, that's great. Absolutely list them. But what I recommend doing is what I did for this gentleman here is having an additional positions section to the resume. And there you would simply list the name, the organizations, and dates of employment for those roles. And you can list them all in a row. And then you can go back as far as you want. If you had a babysitting job when you were a teenager, I'd probably leave that off. But if any kind of professional job you've had in your adult life, I would include that. But again, only go into detail on the roles that you've had probably since 2010 and on. It's probably a good rough estimate or so. If you have one that you loved in 2008, that's fine as well. The only exception to this rule, I would say, is if you served in the United States military or you had a job that's really similar to the job you're applying for now. So let's say you served in the Navy and then you got out of the Navy and then you did 25 years in law enforcement. I would go through and do law enforcement for the last 10 years, list out what you've done, additional duties, and then make a military section and go into detail about the United States military experience that you have. Companies love hiring military veterans. A lot of them get tax breaks for doing so as well. So if you are a veteran, definitely put that on your resume. It can only help you, and adding details for that would be helpful as well. The same thing is, let's say you're applying for an IT job as a cybersecurity specialist, and you did that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and then you went to law enforcement and were a cop for 15 years, and you want to get back to cybersecurity. I would then add a section for cybersecurity roles as well to highlight what you've done in that similar role, just to show that you've experienced in that industry and that type of job. But those are really the only two examples where I'd go into detail on roles you've had that are more than 15 years old. Otherwise, I'd focus on the most recent ones. You see here, I actually put my education and training sections down towards the bottom. I think they are important, but for the most part, people are looking at what your work experience is. So I'd rather have you put it at the bottom than at the top. Um, yes, yes, absolutely. So next question was on training and certification. Do you tailor the job or be generic? Yes. So for education, I would put if you have advanced degrees, so associates or higher, I would put those on there 100%. No matter, I'll keep those on there all the time because people like to see if you have a bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. If you're really cool, include those for every resume. I wouldn't put high school on there if you have if high school is all you have as far as education goes. I would leave your education section completely off. Everyone pretty much assumes you graduated high school, and putting on there just takes up space and just kind of almost draws in that you don't have further education, which is not a problem to me. But some companies are strange with their educational needs. When it comes to certifications and trainings, so this is actually probably a poor example because this one's a little too long. I recommend only having about 10 to 12 of your most relevant certifications for the job you're applying for. An example I like to use is that when I was a deputy sheriff, I was a beanbag shotgun operator. So I went through a training to get a beanbag shotgun. I got to carry it with me during my patrol days. So it was cool. I really enjoyed having it. Never had to use it, but it was cool. Extra piece of equipment to have. But when I was applying to the tech industry, right? Do you think they would care if I'm applying for a recruiting job? Do they care that I was a certified beanbag shotgun operator? Probably not, right? And we in law enforcement and the military, we take so much training. If you've been in law enforcement or in local, state, or federal, or in the military, you probably have uh, dozens of pages of training records. Don't put them all on your resume. Find the ones that are most relevant to the job you're applying for. Think of leadership ones, technical ones that are really in line with the job you're pursuing. But the leadership ones, especially, are very important. And anything that you do that can really highlight why you're a good fit for the job. The other ones I would leave off. I think it's good to have a training document ready in case they ever ask you for it. Then you can bring it forward. But I wouldn't have every single every single training or certification you've done over the history of your life, because again, that could make the resume 50 pages long, and no one wants to read through all that. So that's a great question. I would leave that off unless it's relevant to the job. It's probably good to have some on there. So even if some of them are not quite as relevant, but let's say you only have 5 certifications, put them on there to show that you're dedicated to advancing your skill set. But again, if you have dozens or hundreds of trainings, find the top 10 or 12 that are most relevant to you and your and what you're trying to do. This one doesn't have it, but if you have room at the bottom, include an honors or awards section. So if you won, an Officer of the Year award, if you won some kind of um, um, Medal of Valor or anything else, have that on your resume for sure. It's a great talking point. It shows that you've dedicated your life to service, and it's just a great way to get your foot in the door with an organization. But if your resume is completely full because of the other great things you've added, that's probably the first section I would take off. It's a nice to have, but I wouldn't put it on there and sacrifice um, other information that you could put on there in its stead. So for this one, it didn't fit. But if you have room on there, I would put an honors and awards section. All right. Now I want to quickly dive into applicant tracking systems. So as I mentioned earlier, an applicant tracking system is a software tool used by companies to manage and say organize in their job search and hiring process. Oh, sorry, one question here. Is it necessary to list which specific academy you went through? If you're, I wouldn't honestly. Um, Honestly, most private companies won't really care what exact academy went through. So for my resume, I don't even put the fact that I went through the academy on there. I have my bachelor's degree on there, and then I have leadership courses I took through FBI LEDA and a few other ones. Some people love to have their academy name and name on there. Um, it's a personal opinion, but I would honestly leave that off. Again, unless it's something you're really proud of. The only exception to, I guess, this wouldn't really be an academy, but if you went to the FBI National Academy, then I would put that on there because that one's a really well known or well recognized one. But if you went to your local PD's academy, I would probably leave that off. But great question. Thanks, Dan. For the education too, I should have mentioned, I probably mentioned it again as well. I recommend leaving off your date of graduation. Couple of really one main reason. Um, Age discrimination is a real thing, unfortunately, and the more we can do to not make that a thing, and to you don't want to give information that could hurt you, because either your graduation date will show you how young you are, or it could show that you're a little bit more experienced. Let's put it that way. And unfortunately, companies might look at that and see if you graduated with a bachelor's degree in the 80s, they're going to do some math in their head and figure out what age you are. And then they might say, "Oh, this person's probably getting close to retirement. Let's not interview him or her." So I would leave that part off. I would also leave off your GPA, because honestly, no one cares. If you graduate with a degree, that's all that matters. Whether it be a 4.0 or a 2.0, it really counts the same to companies. No one's going to ask for your transcripts. So I would leave that off as well. Um, Great question, Dan. I really appreciate that. So back to applicant tracking systems. Most companies use it. I think they said 90%. It might even be higher than that. Again, I use it. It's a lifesaver for me, but it's also one that companies can take advantage of and not utilize in a fair way. Again, it's a place where you can stay organized. You can literally post your job once or create your job posting once, hit submit, and it'll go to all 30 job boards. And when someone applies, they all come funneled back to me in one centralized location. So instead of me having to have a LinkedIn account, an Indeed account, a Dice account, a Monster account, and all those, it's going to make it so much easier for me, and it all comes to one location. But again, like I said, when you are applying for jobs, it is going to be so important that you read through the job description and find out what these companies are looking for. And I use the example quite often. Let's say you were a FTO or field training officer, and you were responsible for training a younger officer. Let's say on your resume, you put on there that you trained rookie officers. Let's say that's the wording you used. And in the job you're applying for, they want somebody who has experience mentoring new employees, right? So they're looking for mentoring new employees. You have training rookie officers. Basically the exact same thing, right? But as far as the ATS is concerned, you do not have that experience. It's going to look for the words mentoring, new, and employee, and you have training rookie officers. So you're going to get absolutely no points for the Oh, sorry about that. Where did I lose you all? Okay, gotcha. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say if I'm repeating myself, I do apologize. My mic must have cut off. But let's say that you on your resume you say that you trained rookie officers, but the job you're applying for is looking for candidates who have mentored new employees. Even though it's exactly the same, as far as the ATS goes, you do not have that experience, and they'll give you a zero on that on those keywords, saying you do not have that experience. And again, if a recruiter is lazy or overworked, and that lack of keywords puts you at number 11 out of 100, and he only reads the top 10, you may never get looked at. Your resume may never get looked at by human eyes. So I would much rather you tailor your resume and focus on, submitting 2 or 3 really strong applications a day versus doing 20 or 30 a day where you're just submitting your resume blindly and hoping something sticks. It might seem counterintuitive, but honestly, less is more in this case. Again, you'll be much better off tailoring your resume and making it a good fit for that role specifically. The format matters as well. I'll see candidates that will create their resume in places like Canva, which is a great website. It's a good place to do all kind of marketing, other things. But then they'll save their resume as like a PNG or some kind of image, and those images are really hard for ATSs to scan. So then you're not getting any credit for anything. So it's much better to have, a clean and simple resume format, kind of like the one I showed you, than having one that's really complicated. I'll see resumes with people having bar graphs and charts and boxes and all kind of other things. And all those things just kind of get in the way of the scan. So keep it relatively simple. Again, you're welcome to use my resume template. If you don't have it yet, just send me an email after this or put your email in the comments and I'll send it over to you for free. If you don't like mine, no hard feelings. You can go on Microsoft Word and look up templates for resumes. They're on there. You can Google free resumes and find a good number of ones there as well. Really, no need to pay for a resume template. There are ones out there you can pay for, but for the most part, you can get them for free. All right, Charles asks, have you used AI to identify languages from the job posting to include in your resume? Um, Yes, so it's an interesting thing for sure. AI, again, I mentioned earlier, it should be a tool that you still I think everyone should use AI to benefit them, but also be cautious with it as well. So one thing that I have candidates do if they're like applying to numerous jobs, say they desperately need a role and they're trying to apply for a good number of roles every day, take a job description and put it into ChatGPT or your AI platform of choice and ask it to pull out the words it thinks are the most critical, right? And it can pull out some pretty decent ones. Usually it's pretty spot on. And you can even have put your work experience in there and ask it to tailor it towards that job. That's something people do as well. So you can actually have it tailor your resume towards the job you're applying for. Again, I would still be cautious and double check it and read through it to make sure it actually meets what you want it to say. Because the last thing you want to do is have it put down something on there, and then you go to interview and they'll ask you about it, and you don't even remember it being on there because you never actually wrote it yourself. Yeah, LinkedIn AI is interesting. It's a newer feature they have. Still trying to figure out whether or not I like it or not, but it is pretty interesting. It has some good potential, I think. But I think it's worth at least checking out. But yeah, use a good format. Again, don't have to pay for one. Mine's free. The other one's free on Word or online. But again, keep it relatively simple. Mine had the blue theme kind of to it, but that was pretty much it. You don't want to have like 30 different colors and different graphs and other weird things on there. I see a lot of people send me resumes where they'll have a section where they like score themselves. So it'll be like hard work, 9 out of 10, team player 9.5 out of 10, and it's just like who's making up these random numbers and how are you scoring yourself on this? So don't do things like that. Again, keep it relatively simple and professional. That's a big thing. And then the last one here again is tailor your application for each resume. Take the time. I know it's a pain in the butt, but you do want to make sure you do that. And it's going to pay huge dividends in the end. All right, so I'm actually going to show you what my applicant tracking system looks like. Just give you an example. Okay, so this is just a screenshot I took. This is an older one I did, but for this job, you see that I was hiring for a talent acquisition specialist. And on the column on the left, under new candidates, all the candidates that have come in for the role. And you see the percentage score underneath their little icon there from 13, 10, 10, and it keeps going down from there. So this is what recruiters will see, and every applicant tracking system does it slightly different, but this is how mine looks. And you can see that it's literally giving me a score based on how close this candidate is to the job. And these ones are pretty low. So a recruiter may not even take the time to look at him or her. But I have placed and found candidates who scored terribly on an applicant tracking system, but were actually phenomenal candidates. And either their resume was lacking or the system just had a brain fart and didn't do a good job with it. So, but this is a gentle reminder to make sure you're tailoring your resume to the job you're applying for. And but I should always say, be honest on your resume. Don't lie. I'll have people put every single skill that the job's looking for on there, is thinking it'll help them. It's not going to help you in the long run. You're going to get caught out, and it's just going to hurt your chances of landing a job with that company. Another thing I've seen is somewhat people do is they actually have copied and pasted the entire job description, put it in size like one font, and pasted it at the bottom of their resume and put the writing in white so that it wouldn't show up. So then they would score 100% on the scan. So when I see 100%, the first thing I do is go through the resume and see to highlight everything and see if something else pops up. Those are all games people play. It's not worth it. We come from a profession where, integrity and honesty is so important. Keep that theme going throughout your whole career. It's not worth it. Again, this is my tracking system, what it looks like. All right. Second to last slide here, I think. So some quick to-dos and not to-dos on your resume. All right. The to-do one, clean professional layout, keep it to 1 to 2 pages. A professional font is always a good idea. I like Calibri or Times New Roman, but there are a few other ones as well, but don't go anything too crazy. What do you recommend for an officer that is 6 to 8 months out from being eligible for retirement? That's a great question. So 6 to 8 months is a great time to get started. So what I would do for that time period is get your resume and your LinkedIn fully squared away. It's super important that those are ready to go and start networking on LinkedIn. I wouldn't necessarily start applying yet, but I would at least start reaching out to people at the companies that you're interested in, just to see if you can build a relationship with them. Because nowadays, who you know is often more important than what you know. But I actually plan to have another one of these trainings based on that exact question. So you can also talk to me offline as well. And then I'll mention my book at the end. I actually have a 6 month roadmap in the book that kind of gives a 6 month process for people leaving the service, what they should be doing the last 6 months as well. Okay, but back to the really quick to the resume. Use a good a good font. I like Calibri and Times New Roman. Bullet point format is important. Don't use paragraphs. Spell check and grammar, of course. Use your full name, your current location, just the city and the state, not your address. Put your personal phone number and personal and appropriate email. Your LinkedIn profile link, if as long as you're using LinkedIn to further your career. An executive summary, about 4 or 5 sentences. 9 to 12 skills, the titles and positions you work for, as well as the company's name, dates of employment, key responsibilities. Use action verbs. Don't just be generic. Be proud of what you've done. So if you've initiated 3 programs, tell us about it. You don't just want to tell it, but you actually want to show it as well by using words that really articulate what you've done and using metrics to further that. Education, anything advanced degrees that you've taken, certs and training, as long as they are relevant to the job you're applying for. And last and not least, and I'll repeat it again, is tailor your resume for each job. Okay, and then quickly the not to dos. Don't include personal information like age or marital status. I mentioned it before. There's enough biases in the world. Don't introduce him even more into the hiring process by talking about your age, your marital status, religion, your political affiliations, any of that kind of stuff. Leave it off there. You don't want anyone to disqualify you just because of that. Hobbies, honestly, no one cares. I would leave that off as well. Don't lie about qualifications. That's a big no-no. You will be caught out eventually, so it's not worth it. Don't use cliches and generic phrases like a hard worker. It means nothing. It gets you no further with the recruiter. Think about every word and every sentence in there should have a purpose behind it. Should be really focused on what you're trying to achieve, which is to land a job in the industry, in the company of your dreams. So make sure every single word in there is thought out and articulated and why it should be there. Don't make an excessively long resume. 2 pages should be what you're aiming for, 3 at the max. Don't have an inappropriate email. No flashy designs or colors or graphics. Don't go crazy with a bunch of rainbow colors on there. Keep it pretty consistent. Make sure you check your spelling and grammar. And honestly, references as well. That's a question I get sometimes. I actually leave references off my resume because it is something that they can ask for later on. And if you put it on there, it's just going to take up space. So leave references off as well. All right. So everyone, here is my email address, my phone number, my company's website, which is recruitingheroesllc.com, and my author website, which is whittingtonbooks.com. You'll see my company logo in the middle, and my book is on the right. So if you're interested in getting a copy of that, it's available on my website or on Amazon. The ebook is like $4, and the paperback's like $10. And honestly, I donate almost all the royalties to charity anyway. But it's a great resource that helped a lot of officers so far, and hopefully it'll help you as well. Let me quickly get in my, pardon me. All right. Do any of you have any questions for me about resume writing at all? I'm going to set this off for now just so I can see you all again. Like I said, resume writing is something that it takes practice. The more you do it, the better you will get at it. So don't worry if you're not good at it initially. It's definitely something that it does take practice to get better at. I've done resumes for probably close to 1,000 people now, between frontline officers all the way up to chiefs and sheriffs and high-ranking federal agents. Um, if it's not a problem if your resume isn't good, reach out to me. I'm happy to help anytime. Um, Neil, thank you so much as well. Thank you, Neil. I really appreciate it. And Eric, are ghost jobs becoming more prevalent? Yes. So ghost jobs are certainly a thing. There's, we can ask a lot of different experts and they'll give different numbers, but a decent estimate is about probably around 30 to 40% of jobs out there aren't real jobs. Not necessarily scams, they could be, but some of them are just companies trying to get more resumes into their database. So they'll just they'll put a job out there that isn't necessarily real and just accept resumes. That way, when the time comes that they need to find somebody, they have a pool of resumes, and or they can also sell resumes and contact information to other companies down the line as well. So they are a thing. So got to be cautious of that. What I usually do is I look at if you like the job on LinkedIn or Indeed, let's say, go look at the company and look at their website and see what all they have on their website. If the job's also on their website, chances are it's more likely to be legitimate than ones that don't share that kind of thing on their personal website. If it's just on Indeed or Monster, be a little bit more cautious. Well, I'm glad this helped you all. Like I said, resume writing is something I really love. So if you all need help with your resume, it's a service that my company offers. Not to do too sales pitchy here, but you do get half off for attending this class. So send me a message, shoot us an email, and I'd be happy to help. Um, if you can definitely like this video and subscribe to the channel, that's going to be hugely helpful for me as well. I'm very new to YouTube, so I do apologize if the audio or the video wasn't perfect. I'm definitely more concerned with making sure the content is strong and useful to you all than making flashy videos. So I apologize if it's not like the super high quality of videos you might see on other channels. Um, if there are other topics you all think would be useful, feel free to comment that as well. If you think LinkedIn optimization would be useful, let me know, or interview training. These are all things that I'd be happy to talk about. Again, my company, all we do is help vets and law enforcement officers with their transition. And now we work with companies as well that want to hire candidates. So we're working with large companies and small companies around the country that want to hire first responders, that want to hire veterans. And it's been really cool to see how many companies are excited to work with us just because of who we're trying to place, which is you all. So we've had the chance to work with L3Harris, with Wegmans, with Allied Universal, and then a bunch of small companies too. And so feel free to check out our jobs on our website. And if any of them interest you, reach out to us too. And I can try to have open a conversation up between you and the company. Um, and yeah, check out our website. And if you need anything else in the meantime, feel free. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. So ask questions if you have them. The backlight from the windows over. Yeah, the back. Okay, I'll make sure I close that next time. Okay. The LinkedIn Premium. I think LinkedIn Premium is a good thing to have if you're actively looking for a job. I wouldn't recommend it for people just to casually have all the time, but let's say your goal is to have a job in the next 6 months. I would probably get it. It opens yourself up to having more conversations with recruiters. It makes you slightly more visible. It lets you message people at a slightly higher rate. So I think LinkedIn Premium is good in the short term. Again, I wouldn't do it for long term. I have to pay for LinkedIn Recruiter, which is insanely expensive. It's like $800 a month, but it helps me find a lot of candidates. But for the average user, LinkedIn Premium could be pretty useful. Come on, got me more questions, I'm sure. Well, if there's nothing else, again, thank you so much for being here. I really love this. I can't wait to do this again. I'll probably plan for another session in like 2 or 3 weeks. Feel free to send an email if you have suggestions. And yeah, this is gonna be a lot of fun. And stay safe out there. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you all soon. Bye, guys. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate you being here.